Welcome to day one of Scraptember 2022. I am going to work over this month. There's a series of challenges and today's is stitching, but I'm going to work on an 8.5 by 11 album of a tramp that my husband and daughter and I did at the end of last year. I've had all these photos sitting there waiting to be documented. They're printed and everything, and just saw this 30-day challenge with lots of different prompts and things as a good way to get this done. So I'm just grabbing, I've grabbed a selection of papers and I am just going to cut each of these strips in half, some of them in half, some of them 6 by 6, some 5 by 7, just a few different sizes and lengths, and there are a few different widths as well. So the papers I'm using, this leafy one here was a Christmassy, sort of a more modern tropical Christmas collection from the end of last year, I think. It might have even been the year before. I really love that collection, as well as one of the new collections in the annual book called Flower Shop. If you check out my Instagram, I did use Flower Shop and put together a kit that I sold for other ladies going to a recent scrapbook day in Invercargill. So I'm going to just do some background stuff here on this. So I'm going to just use some greens and I'm just going to add a few splatters. So I'm just sort of making sure they're quite wet in that little paint tray there, and then just flicking and dropping them on the page. So I'm using a few different greens, pulling those in, sort of a mid, a dark, and another sort of mid but a slightly different toned green. The area that we were walking through was the Copeland Valley up the west coast of New Zealand, and it is a much longer track than I remembered doing many years ago when my husband and I first started dating. So either my fitness level has changed, which it has, but also the track has changed a little bit. The first starting bit used to be a lot shorter. We cut through more bush and you sort of drove up further, I think, with the car park or something like that, but it was a little bit longer than I remembered, and it wasn't quite as uphill as I remembered either. But it did take quite a long time to get in there. But the photo that I'm putting onto this layout today was when we just started walking out. So we're all nice and fresh, looking forward to the day ahead, and looking forward to the natural hot pools that are at the top of this track. So this is at Welcome Flat Hut that we're heading to. But here we are, just starting off in a really well-formed track, which wasn't this well-formed many years ago when I first did it either, so it was quite surprising to see edges and sort of gravelled, flatter tracks than what I'd been used to. So I am just going to pop the photo onto a piece of the white cardstock that was left over from trimming the base page down to 8.5 by 11 from a 12 by 12 page, so that it gives a little bit of a white border. You can sort of see there, I'm lining it up on my mat the way it might turn out, or the way it sort of might come together on the page. So I'm now looking at the papers thinking, okay, which ones are going to back this photo quite nicely before I stick them down, and I'm just going to use some scissors to trim around to give a little bit sticking out. I am keeping this reasonably neat so that the pieces are already stuck down. Sometimes I have a little bit random and haphazard, but I will wrinkle up the edges of the photo to make it sit nicely out the edge there. So to give it a little bit more texture once it's down onto that base page. So happy with how that's sort of coming together and looking. So I'm going to bring down that paper now that the paint's dried, and I am going to sort of slowly stick down some of these pieces. Now I didn't remember exactly how I'd laid these out when I was trialling it on the cutting mat earlier, but that's okay. They are coming together now. I just need to do a bit of overlapping so that it's not completely even and straight, and just with those different sizes, different lengths and different widths, just wanted that sort of to fall down off the page a little bit. So now I'm going to add stitching, which is today's Scraptember prompt. I'm going to do some hand stitching across the tops of these sort of paper loops. So as I'm poking, I'm just sort of making sure I'm counting in doubles so that there will just be sort of one stitch across, and I won't need to go back and fill in the gap because I want the stitching to be obvious. Just going to add another little row of stitches, just a shorter one here as well as on the other end. So just a few stitches there, and I may end up covering some of these with the photos, but it gives me a good starting point. So I'm just going to use some green embroidery floss. I do play around with a couple of different greens to decide which one to use before I select sort of this middle green colour, mainly because of the colours in the photograph and just wanting to tie those greens into the background. So stitching those on there, I won't make you see all of the stitching, just going to do parts of it, and then I'll just do the rest off screen once I've given a good start in here. So the stitching added a really nice texture once that was done. So you can see that that's all stitched on now, so I'm going to stick down the photograph, just adding some 3D foam tape there because on one side there I don't have those flat bits underneath. I needed the foam tape just to lift it up to sort of make it a little bit more level. So I've got that on, and now I'm just going to curl up the edges of the papers. I like doing this just because it adds a bit of texture, makes it not so straight up and down and neat and tidy, so it gives room for things to not be perfectly straight and stuff like that. I had a few stamps here to have a play around with. I'd grabbed some outdoorsy type stamps that I could use. However, I've only brought away with me a smaller stamping block, so I'm going to have to change the stamp that I sort of thought I would use to start with, but that's okay. It works out really nicely in the end, and the message about getting out and about is still quite obvious in the stamp. So I've just also bought only a small ink block. That's okay. Sorry about the wobbles when I'm doing the stamping. The portable sort of light and stand that I'm using does wobble a bit with the table movement. So I'm just going to fussy cut around this. This stamp set did originally come with some thin cuts. However, I don't have the die cutting machine with me. I've sort of I'm away from home for family reasons, and just bought a few bits and pieces to help keep my mind busy, and yeah, so just making do with what I've got here, which it's kind of a fun challenge within itself. So I'm going to tuck this in sort of up the top here, played around with a few different places, and again I'm going to use that 3D foam tape just to mount that up there so it just sits nicely and a bit more level with the different levels of photo and the paper bits that I've got there. So now I've sort of got a bit of a title going on. I need a little bit of journaling tucked in here, and I decided to do that sort of along this strip. There will be lots of photos and lots of pages in this album, so don't need to put everything in the page, or yeah, there's lots of memories and lots of little bits on this trip, so there's more than just this page to document stuff. So I had pulled out a few of the Close to My Heart cricket die cuts that I've made. So these were just printed on from the cricket digital files, or from the digital files by Close to My Heart. Yeah, just print and cut on the cricket, so it's quite cool. I was able to add a little bit of a white border around them, and the colours are really nice and vibrant. So played around with some of those possibilities, and decided just on that one flower. So now I felt like it needed something around the edge of the layout, so I'm just using a journaling pen just to draw a line around the edge, and it felt like it needed something more still. It was sort of a little bit isolated or something, so I decided I'm just going to add some of that green that I use for the splatters in the background to just paint in on the edges where the pen is out from it a little bit. And I actually really liked how this turned out, so I may do this on a few more pages through this Scraptember project. But yeah, just filling in and going back. It's not completely even, it'll be paler in parts as it sort of got drier or got more paint, less water kind of thing around that edge, but just it finishes it off quite nicely and and comfortably. So again, just filling in some of those spaces. Some of the bits are going to be wider than others and some aren't. So for the month of Scraptember, I hope that you will pop in and see the different prompts each day. There will be a playlist that lots of other people are contributing to as well. So I'm still learning how to link all that up, but I will get that done a little bit later. But hey, thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this, I'd love to have you subscribe, and then you won't miss any more. Thanks again.